Hey guys, today's episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast is presented by the Sports Spectrum magazine. I think the magazine is maybe the best thing we do here at the Ministry of Sports Spectrum. We have a quarterly magazine, 4 issues every single quarter. We had Monty Williams from the Phoenix Suns on the cover of our last issue. We had Dabo Sweeney on the cover back in the fall for our football preview. And coming up in the spring, we have Adam Wainwright and his wife Jenny. Adam, of course, from the St. Louis Cardinals, will be on the cover of our spring edition of Sports Spectrum's magazine. You do not want to miss that story. And so you can order Sports Spectrum's magazine right now, and it's super cheap, $18 for a 1-year subscription or $30, an even better deal, for a 2-year subscription. And you can order right now at sportspectrum.com. Just click the magazine icon at the top of the website, and you are good to go. Put your credit card information in, and you are subscribed. And I think it makes a great gift for someone. Maybe you get a couple issues. Maybe you go through it with your kids. There's devotionals in there, amazing stories. So consider the Sports Spectrum magazine, our quarterly magazine. That is actually what this ministry was founded on. The pillar of Sports Spectrum, going all the way back to 1985, comes from the magazine that was founded then, and it's still going strong today. Order your copy of Sports Spectrum's magazine. Get a 1-year or a 2-year subscription over at sportspectrum.com.
This is Sports Spectrum, the intersection of sports and faith, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. I am Jason, and this is the Sports Spectrum podcast. My email address, jason@sportspectrum.com. If you want to reach me directly, jason@sportspectrum.com. You can email me. Love to hear from you. Maybe you have some feedback, some thoughts on this guest, Matt Sayman, or maybe you have a guest idea for a future show, a coach, a player, a broadcaster, somebody that you think would make a good guest on the intersection of sports and faith. You can email me, jason@sportspectrum.com. And then our website is a great place to go for all of our content. You should bookmark that. You really should, and go each and every day over at sportspectrum.com. Today on the show, Matt Sayman is our guest. Matt is a former Baylor men's basketball player. He's written a new book called The Leftovers: Baylor, Betrayal, and Beyond, that released back in late February 2022. Matt received a full scholarship at Baylor University to play basketball from 2000 to 2004. He broke the Baylor career record for games played at 118, and he was one of those leftovers, thus the name of his book, remaining with the program following a shocking scandal in the offseason of 2003. And we'll talk about that scandal. I won't get into too much detail here, but if you're a sports fan, you probably remember 2003 and Baylor basketball. It was a tough time. And Matt Sayman hung in, and stayed with Baylor. He was part of that leftovers program. He actually went to play professionally in Iceland, won the Icelandic championship, and now he's current varsity basketball coach at Grapevine Faith Christian School in Texas, where he led his team to the state semifinals the past 2 years. This is a lot. There's a lot in here for Matt, who talks about faith, who talks about betrayal, bitterness, anger, overcoming a lot. And even after everything that took place in Baylor, Matt had to have this moment of his own where he fully surrendered to Jesus, and it's quite the story. So take a listen to Matt Sayman, the former Baylor men's basketball player, part of the leftovers. He joins us here today on Sports Spectrum. Hey, Matt Sayman, welcome to Sports Spectrum.
Jason, thank you so much for having me on, man.
Absolutely. It's good to talk to you. This is going to be a lot to go through in the short amount of time that we have. There's going to be people who listen to this, I think, and might remember something about Baylor in the early 2000s and not the Baylor that we know today that's winning championships and competing for titles. There might be some that have no idea what happened. early on in the early 2000s at Baylor. And then there's people like me who were covering that story a lot, let's just say, when I was working at ESPN. But let's start with the book. Just the idea of writing a book like this. And here we are, almost 19 years later in 2022 with this book coming out. Why this book, The Leftovers? Why now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was reading a book called The Walk-On, Life at the End of the Bench by Alan Williams. And this was years ago. And I'm reading this story about a guy that kind of looked like me, played like me, athletically like me, that was just on the end of this bench, surviving every year as a walk-on. And I'm reading his story going, man, like that was my experience as a college basketball player. I was a scholarship player, but I had to survive. I felt like every day to keep my scholarship, to keep my spot. So following kind of his story, I started to look at how did I, as a 6'2", not athletic guy, what was the journey that it took for me as a young kid in Pennsylvania with these huge dreams and goals, moving up through high school to college. And then, man, I think Julius Randle and I had very different college experiences in basketball, but we hear more about their stories and what they did. So I thought, here's a blue collar, an example of how you can just really survive by being a great teammate, working as hard as possible, and being coachable. And then I'm just kind of going through my story, and I see, that my senior year, a lot happened. And honestly, to that point, I hadn't revisited very much. And this was a few years ago when I started to put the story together. I hadn't really revisited much and didn't know if a lot of people really cared about what happened. But then even through some of my own life change, being able to put things down in the story helped me to see where, man, I had really gone wrong and some mistakes I had made.
Yeah, and you go a lot of places in this book. You had to be as real and open as you could, I would imagine. I've been there and know that world well, and trying to write a book, and you want to be as transparent and open as possible. What was that process like for you? Because I'm sure there are things, maybe I'm off on this, but I'm sure there are things you didn't include. Maybe it was just too painful or too deep. Maybe you did include everything. Maybe you just put it all out there. What was that like, kind of going through and remembering that process of all that took place in 2003 and beyond with Baylor, and trying to, I don't know, discern, I guess, comes to mind, which words and which stories to share?
Yep. I was listening to a podcast of a pastor, and he said, we need to stop giving edited testimonies, that they don't do anything for anybody. And everybody's story it's our testimony. And I had to choose between trying to make, what I had done for about 9 years after Baylor is I try to make myself look really good, make myself look in front of people like I've got it all together, where inside I'm really empty, angry, and frustrated. And so putting this book together, did I really want to do the same thing? Like just try to make it, man. Yeah. Matt and his team, they went through some stuff, man. He was awesome. And he was really the light that everybody thought or wanted him to be, where really it was a difficult time for me and my teammates. Some of the stories, obviously, I wanted it to be a good basketball book where a kid like me could pick it up in junior high. And so for that reason, there are a lot of details, not the struggles. The struggles are all there, but details I didn't go into because I thought that would be wise for the parents and the kids to leave those out.
Do you share your story a lot to your kids? You're a varsity basketball coach, Grapevine Faith Christian School in Texas. Do you talk a lot about your past with them, or do you just try to keep it, to here and now and then the moment? Being
a high school coach, I think it's really important that I let them know that I'm coming to them from a place of understanding. Like I've been where you are, and at a Christian school where I'm at now, they are a lot like me. They've grown up in the faith. They've heard all the stories. They have all the head knowledge. But if they're not careful, when they go to college, or even right now, if they are hit by some type of adversity, some cloud, some storm that they didn't see coming, they have to make sure that they don't run to things like I did. And because I was blown away by how quickly I could adopt a new set of habits that really in 21 years of living, I never had. So I'm very, again, it's just what's inspiring to people, I think, is authenticity and being real with people. And so for me to try to tell my players that, listen, I've handled adversity well, guys, every time it's ever hit me. That'd just be a straight up lie. And it wouldn't help them at all. It wouldn't give them any peace, because then all of a sudden they're thinking, well, what's wrong with me? Why am I struggling right now when I know Christ? I think I know what's right and wrong, but something's wrong. Something doesn't feel right. I think we all need to be able to, they need to know that, especially us adults or coaches or people in positions of authority. We've struggled too.
Matt Sayman's our guest here on Sports Spectrum. The book is called The Leftovers, Baylor, Betrayal, and Beyond. It's available now everywhere books are found. You got the foreword by Scott Drew, and you got an endorsement from Tony Romo. And he says, I love a good comeback story, and this one has it all. How do you know Romo? Like, what's the relationship there with Tony Romo?
I walked into a random gym in Dallas, Fort Worth, and this was, 2008 or so. And a guy says, hey, Matt, we're just pick up basketball. And I was still trying to play at that point. He said, you're guarding Tony. And not being naturally a big football fan, I looked down the other side and I said, hey, you got to tell me who Tony is. He's like, Tony Romo, the Cowboys starting quarterback. I was like, I've heard of him. And so I started guarding Tony, and we're about the same size. He was a little quicker. I was maybe a little, he was strong too, but I was blown away by his competitive nature. He was diving for loose balls. He was trying to post me up, and I was trying to push him out. Like, who do you think you are? I'm a basketball guy, but we struck up a friendship, and I just kind of became a part of his little, entourage, if you will, going to Tahoe for his golf tournaments, but playing basketball with him for years. Phenomenal guy, was a really good basketball player. And so thankful, humbled that he would endorse the book.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of the time, self-disclosure here, I'm a big Dallas Cowboys fan. So I'm thinking of that time in 07, 08, 09, like that was in his heyday. He had just gotten his big contract, and he's, the firmly stamped quarterback of America's team, right? And you're playing basketball against him, and you really don't know who he is, which I find that fascinating. Living in Texas, you lived in Texas, I presume, at the time.
We were in Dallas, Fort Worth. I just have always had kind of blinders on for my sport. Now, since knowing him, if anybody from Dallas, Fort Worth listens to this, and I am a Cowboys fan now, and I am all in, and I hurt and I celebrate with every time we do something good. So
yeah, and we hurt this year. We'll just say as Cowboys fans.
But I still love Dak.
I love Dak Prescott as well. So this book really depicts your story and your journey, like you said, not just from all of what you went through at Baylor, and we want to tell that story in a second, but kind of growing up. What I want to ask you, though, obviously basketball is a huge part of your journey growing up. What was faith for you? Were you one of those guys that you described as not wanting your players to be the kid who has the head knowledge, but didn't go fully all in, and then when adversity hits, you weren't sure how to handle it? Was that your story?
Yeah, you're right on the money. When I was 5 years old, I prayed a prayer at Awana Cubbies with my mom standing right next to me. And I just grew up going to church every Sunday and Wednesday. And my parents did a great job. I'm not saying they did a great job of keeping us just away from worldly things and focused on what we were supposed to be focused on. But when I was 9 years old is when I fell in love. And that's when I fell in love with basketball. And in my focus, the discipline in my life, and really all my hopes and dreams were all put into the game. And it served me well in the fact that I had more of a laser sharp focus toward training than a lot of my friends did at an early age. And I mean, I was a late bloomer. So even through middle school, I mean, I was around 5'5", 5'7", but I had a size 13 shoe, and I was very skilled with the ball, but just athletically behind. But I had these big goals: make my freshman A team, make varsity as a sophomore, and get a Division I basketball scholarship. And that's what my whole world revolved around. But it also became my family's dream. Going into my freshman year in high school, I went to a basketball camp down in Dallas, Texas. I knew a guy from Pennsylvania that had moved down here. I met a guy named Tommy Thomas, who would become my high school basketball coach. I told him my goals, and he said, "Matt, that can happen for you down here." I flew back up to Pennsylvania, and on the way home from the airport, told my parents, "I need to move to Texas to be a college basketball player." 2 weeks later, we moved down here. So they were all in on a little eighth grader's dream, but they saw how serious I was about it.
Yeah. So it sounds like basketball in many ways was your God for a long time.
Yeah. So I think, we grow up listening and the stories of the Israelites, and man, they just saw part the Red Sea. How are you bowing down to a cat? Like, how idols, guys? It's a little wooden thing. But what happened to me, and I think what's happened to a lot of us now, is idols are real in our lives. They're not these statues, but they're things that we put all of our, golly, it could be coaching for me right now. Like, if I don't win this game, is all of my self-worth and identity wrapped up in that. And that's what basketball happened. But the thing too is this kind of false theology that we can create that is, listen, God, here are my goals. And like a genie, I need you to make sure all of these things happen the way I want, but then I'll be really, really good. And I'll say that I'm a Christian. And that's what I did all the way through my junior year in college. And things did kind of happen the way that I wanted. So it didn't help. But then all of a sudden, life falls apart. What's my foundation in? Well, crap, it's in a game. And that game's done now, what I felt like it was done.
Yeah, I want to get to that in a second. It'd be one thing for me to share and try to explain 2003. But I think it would be better for you to tell us what happened with Baylor's basketball program. And the best way that you can tell it, it's one of the biggest scandals in sports history that we've ever seen. One of the biggest tragedies we've ever seen from a program, and really set Baylor back a long ways too, but it did so much damage through and to other people as well. Let me just paint this picture real quick. You get the full scholarship, you go to Baylor and you're there. But then 2003 happens. It's in between your junior and senior year, if I'm doing the math correctly. Take us through maybe the end of 2003 and your season and leading up to everything that took place so our audience knows.
Well, I was part of Coach Bliss's first recruiting class at Baylor, and sitting across from him as a senior in high school, listening to his vision for the program. I love the school. I was a believer, and so I proclaimed to be a Christian. And yeah. So, and it's a distinction there. And I just thought, man, this is a match made right here. And he literally said, "Matt, you'll be a pillar for our basketball program." And it was kind of, now knowing what we know, it's interesting how it still kind of came true what he said. But at the time, I thought it was in a different way. And so I played every game from my freshman year through my junior year, and started about a third of them. And especially my junior year, I kind of created a role for myself as not just a sixth man, but now a starter that was a glue guy. For our offense and defense to run smoothly, it was good for me to be on the floor. I complimented our studs that we had, John Lucas, Lawrence Roberts, that went on to play NBA basketball. And so going into my senior year, we were picked to be in the top 4 in the Big 12, which you and I know, that means top 25. That means NCAA tournament. My freshman year, we had gone to the NIT. So I'd already had a little bit of a taste of it. And I thought with Coach Bliss, with these future NBA players, with seniors like me and a couple other guys that were good role players, Patrick Denny, he was going to be playing this next year, and everybody knew he was going to be a stud. It was just like, God, everything that as a 9-year-old that you and I discussed and said was going to happen, it's going to happen. And it's a Friday afternoon in June. I'm coming in from my normal routine. Every summer I stayed on campus because I loved it. I loved getting to work with our strength coaches. I felt like I needed every ounce of help I could to survive Big 12 basketball. And I got a call from one of my professors. He said, Matt, what's going on with your team? And I said, oh, what are those guys doing now? Because, you play with some knuckleheads at times. And he said, no, you need to turn on the news right now. They're saying that one of your teammates is missing and it's a possible homicide and that players could be involved.
Whoa.
Well, that's not a call that you expect as a 21-year-old or ever. And I sat down and this story unfolded in front of me. There's a lot of things that were difficult about that, not knowing what was going on with Patrick. You're not necessarily best friends with your teammates, but you go through things in the locker room, in practice, and in games that creates a special relationship. And so just not knowing what had happened with him, things started to circulate with Coach Bliss, this guy that I had I really put my faith and trust in. And we had gone to FCAs, countless FCAs together to speak at the same time. If he told me to try to run through that brick wall, I would have tried. I would have knocked myself out trying. Mm-hmm. So you go through the two, and the thing is, I knew nothing of everything that was happening or had happened. So I'm learning right along with what felt like at the time all of America, because I'm starting to get calls from New York Times, from all of these nationwide news. It'd be really cool if they were calling me, hey, Matt, listen, you're a heck of a player. Your team's about to be darn good. We want to know.
Yeah.
That's not it. It's, what do you know? What can you tell us that we don't already know? And I just felt like this world that I was, created or a part of, this Baylor bubble, was just closing in on me. Found out over those 2 months that one of my teammates had shot and killed one of my other teammates. The funny thing is, Carlton, the guy that shot Patrick, him and I were pretty close that junior year. Our playing time seemed to rise and fall together. And so we had each other's back in a lot of ways, but at the end of that junior year, his scholarship wasn't renewed for the next year. But Patrick and Dottie, we all thought were pretty good friends. Were roommates for a time. So we found out that he had shot and killed him. They started to dive into Coach Bliss and what he had been doing. I was amazed we had the quality of players that we had, but I never dreamed that there was anything bad happening to make that, anything dirty happening. And there's a moment where Coach Bliss, I hadn't seen him in weeks, and I see him in the bottom of the Farrell Center at Baylor, and he comes and I was such a good follower, I was so coachable. Yeah. That I said, Coach, listen, I'm sorry that everything's happening to you. I don't appreciate what they're saying about you. And just so you know, we have our ear back. Like, it's kind of hard to even think about saying those things. And, but that's how I felt. He said, oh, Matt, thank you. Come, let me talk to you. He took me into the coaching office, and, about the distance you and I would be if we were sitting, really face to face. And he said, Matt, I appreciate you saying that. And this is really, we went into Patrick's locker or apartment, and we found money and drugs, and that's how he's paying for school. And I said, yeah, man, that makes sense. Like, I get it. He didn't say, Matt, this is the lie that we need people to tell. Matt, it was basically, Matt, you'll believe anything I'll tell you. So this is what's happening. He told it to me like it was the truth. I took it. That night I called my dad, and I told him, I said, Dad, I had to talk with Coach Bliss today, but man, something was wrong. He was off in it. He just didn't, I'd watched him do a 4-hour 4-man flex video in one take. Mm-hmm. I knew he was just such a great speaker, but he was all over the place and wouldn't look me in the eye. And so a few weeks go by. I'm up in Pennsylvania visiting a friend. I had to get out of Waco, and our media guy calls me late at night and says, Matt, you need to have your phone on the next day. And I'd kind of been designated the the media guy. And I never wanted that title.
Yeah.
I liked being behind the scenes and just doing my work, but getting to slip right out after games and not have to go in to do anything. But I was really the only one left at the time. And the only one I think Baylor trusted not to say the wrong thing or project the wrong image. So my buddy comes, wakes me up, and he says, "Matt, you need to come look at the newspaper." I just walked out. It's like, this has been happening for a month and a half now. And it's the story of an assistant coach recording Coach Bliss talking to other players, not me, but other players and other coaches. And it's the lie, the story he had told me, but hey, this is what we need people to believe. This is how we get out of this mess. And it was just this loss of innocence. I'd always believed my coaches. And at that point, mentally, I was just done. I was done. We lost 10 teammates that summer, which, from just knowing sports so well, that's a lot of turnover.
Yes.
Usually you get 3 or 4, and especially with transfer portals and things like that. Now that wasn't even a thing back then, but our new studs coming in didn't come. Our best players left. And it was just me and 6 other players that were role players or dudes that didn't even play on last year's team. Like, they were bench warmers and walk-ons. So that was that summer. And then Coach Drew, I get a call driving back to Waco just one day. "Hey, they got you a coach." And I said, thought, who in the world would take this job?
Right. Some little unknown guy named Scott Drew, right?
And they say Scott Drew. And I said, never heard of him, man.
Yeah.
And then that senior year began.
And that's the whole idea of the title of the book, The Leftovers. That's obviously, there's more than just that 2004, 2003, 2014, but that's what it was. You were part of these leftovers, these players trying to just push forward. There's a lot to process there. And obviously, for time constraints, we don't have time to go into it all as much as I wish we did. But the idea of processing this and remaining with the team, was it ever a consideration not to remain with the team?
Yes. And I go into that in the book too, because I never wanted people to think that I didn't struggle. I tried to show that. Again, if I was talking in media or anything at the time, that I did, that I was all, that's why they wanted me to speak in front of the cameras, is because I would project a pro Baylor message.
Sure.
And that I was the guy that they could count on. So when Coach Bliss called me, I was actually in my parents' house in Dallas-Fort Worth, and he let me know that he was going to resign, and that he wanted us all to meet in Waco. He wanted to talk to us, and then he was going to publicly do it. I had a moment of, this is all falling apart. We're not going to have a team. We're not going to have a season. What can I do? That me monster really took over. And I had watched a lot of guys come in and try to be 1-year guys that I thought they are more skilled than me. They're more athletic. They have more experience, but it's hard. They're red shirts, so they're out of it. And they try to come in and get a rhythm and learn a new system. I just seen it not work out well in my perspective. So I called one school that had recruited me in high school, and the guys weren't even there anymore that had recruited me. And then my buddy, Logan Kosmalski, who had played 2 years at Baylor with me earlier, he had left when after Lawrence Roberts had come in and played the way he did and his playing time changed. He had left to go back to Davidson, where his older brother, Landry Kosmalski, played. I called Logan. Kind of just a little funny thing is, when Logan had left, I tried to talk him into staying, that we are in such a great place here. It's kind of like, Logan, like you knew something, knew. but I called him and I said, "Hey, do you think you could talk to your coach for me? I really would like to come play." And I talked to the coach there for maybe about 10 minutes. He said, "Matt, I'm sorry for everything you're going through, but we just don't take 1-year guys." And I said, "I get it." And plus, a problem too is, again, I'm 6'2.5". I said 6'3" in the program, so I'll take 6'3", and I averaged 4.5 points a game. Right. But man, I hustle hard. I take charges. I dive on the floor. I'll guard anybody. It's just not a good sell.
Yeah.
And so I walked back inside the house and I said, I'm here.
Wow.
I'm here.
And you became part of the leftovers and went through that season. You actually went on and played pro a little bit too. I want to fast forward a little bit because there's a moment where Christ comes back into your life in a pretty powerful way. I want you to share that. And then I want to get into some thoughts about forgiveness and bitterness and anger and some of the things that we all wrestle with, or I should say unforgiveness, and kind of how you process that the older you've gotten. Take me to that moment though. You're 30, I believe. You depict it so well in the book, and you have this moment and you realize something's off. Share that with us.
So yeah, that's summer 2003. Instead of running to God, I ran from. And in fact, I threw myself into a lifestyle of partying and doing things that I had never done before in my previous 21 years. And it was amazing how well it worked. When I mean it worked, I was able for 3 or 4 hours at a time to have some peace, to laugh and to smile. But man, everything it was back the next day. Those destructive habits. There was a moment that year in a Bible study at my apartment that I was kind of ashamed to have because I would have to clean up from the night before. But the coaches were this new coaching staff, Coach Juno, they were having Bible studies every week with us. One of the assistant coaches said, and it's almost like if you've ever been in a church setting and the pastor's talking and you feel like, man, this message is just for me. Like I'm supposed to hear this. Coach Mills at ORU now said, don't think you can live the way that you want, do whatever you want now. And that when you get out in the real world as an adult, temptations will go away and you'll be able to get back to what we would call right living.
Yeah.
I remember as just a cocky, arrogant 21-year-old looking at him going, you know what? You're wrong. That's exactly what I'm going to do because this is hard right now, what I'm going through. I need any bit of relief I can get, and I'll do anything I have to do to get it. But when I get out in the real world and I'm an adult, I'll go back to church again. I'll go back to my foundation. And fast forward, I was 21 then, 9 years I did play professional basketball in Iceland. It's the only place in the world that would take me because my senior year, I did average 8.5 points playing 38 minutes a game. So but I left Iceland in a bad way because of those habits. Even though we had won a championship already there and I was averaging a triple double, my off-court habits, they asked me to leave. And that was my end of my playing career. And 9 years of broken relationships, anger, resentment. It started because of a situation that I did not create. I didn't do anything wrong back then to create this situation of the leftovers and what we went through, but I didn't handle it well either. I never asked God, what can I learn in this situation? How can I be a light? I was faking being a light, but I wasn't really being a light. And I just held on to all of this. And these destructive habits followed me everywhere, every job that I ever took in every place. I'm 30 years old, sitting in my apartment in McKinney, Texas, where I'm a varsity assistant coach at McKinney High School. And I'm 30 by myself alone with a 6-pack and thinking, is this really it? I was always reflecting back to the good person that I was. I actually just talked about this the other day with my players. The problem, why do good things happen to good people? Well, the problem is that statement, good things happening to good people. There are no good people.
That's right.
We are born not good. So I have grown up with this lie. I'm a good person. Bad things shouldn't happen to me. And I'm 30 holding on to that. I went to a church the next Sunday, a church that I don't normally go to, listened to a sermon that I've heard 1,000 times and filled out a visitor's card. And I never filled out a card because those of us that grow up going to church, we're never visitors.
Right.
So we never fill out a card, but we always pass it. So I fill it out. I said, I'm angry and I have questions. I never expected to get anything back from that card. And a lady emails me. We set up a time. I go to that church. She opens the door. We talk for a little bit. I go in and talk with that pastor, tell him the story, basically like I've just told you today. And he says, Matt, you got to give up control. I was like, no. Listen, I did that when I was 5. Like, I understand that. I understand why is all this happening? He's like, Matt, listen, you have to give up control. You're 21. Bad things happen to you. You took control of your happiness. You took control of your peace. You did whatever you had to do. You thought you were going to be the master, the God of your life. And there's just kind of this light bulb moment where basketball was God of my life for a long time. That didn't work. I tried to be God of my life for a long time. That didn't work. And so I had to surrender and truly, truly make him Lord of my life. And, I've been watching and listening a lot. Like, how do you know your faith is real? Like, how do you know that change is real? And it's life change, life change. Not that I'm oh man, I'm not perfect. No, there's no way.
I haven't met one yet, Matt.
Yep. But there's life change, and I can see it from that moment. The things that I was drawn to, I moved away from. The anger and resentment and bitterness, I let that go, and got into the Word more, and started to really plug into church, not just attend church, but plug into church. Another part of this story is because I think God puts people in our lives to help us and to move us along that path. That lady that emailed me and let me into that church, we married each other 11 months later. So, man, I walked into that day just wanting to vent a little bit. But my plans as a 9-year-old were to be a college basketball player. I had no plan B and nothing past that. But God's plan was for me to meet Jan and for her to be the best thing that's ever happened to me in my life, minus Christ. That's a lot there's a lot there.
There is a lot there. It's a really cool story of how you guys met. Anger, resentment, bitterness, unforgiveness, all of that. Some of this can go all the way back to Coach Bliss and all that took place at Baylor. Some of it could just be the stuff you were going through on your own that you just described. After Christ, after surrendering to Christ, we'll say, what changes because I got saved when I was 26 or 27, but I hadn't fully surrendered because I knew that I was carrying bitterness towards my dad. Him and I had a broken relationship. And it wasn't until much later, even after 10 years of being a Christian, where I finally understood what forgiveness was about. Did you have any struggles there? Or were you able to, once you surrendered your life to Christ, to, as it says in Ephesians 4, to put all that bitterness and anger aside and live for Jesus?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I think I was able to forgive Coach Bliss, and we had some moments where we had connected at coaches' clinics. He actually came to practice. My very first practice at Grapevine Faith Christian School, Coach Bliss came to it, and I was just so nervous to have this guy that basketball wise I held on in such a high regard. And at that point in his life, he had turned his story around for good, and was really trying to help people through the bad things that he had done and he had gone through. So I appreciated that about him. So there's forgiveness there. I think for the longest time, I left that senior year thinking that none of this matters. Like what we did playing, we were 8-21. We were more competitive than anybody ever dreamed we would be. We beat Iowa State. We beat A&M twice. Their coach was fired the day after we beat them the second time, because losing to leftovers is the worst thing you can do. Yeah. We're up 14 at Oklahoma with Coach Sampson. We're down 4 at Kansas, like with 6 players, and we are not good players. We're average with a 32-year-old coach. like all the underdog part of the story is just incredible. Yeah. But I left thinking, who cares? And there's just an emptiness there. Sometimes, I mean, this isn't just about basketball, but you with you and your dad, in the moment, you especially when you have all that anger and resentment, that why is this happening? You can't see it. and there's frustration in not seeing the why to our pain and our suffering. Sometimes we may never know until we're on the other side, but time goes by and I'm able to, and with the right perspective, a godlike perspective, or through his eyes, able to look back and see some of the whys behind what happened. Coach Bliss had said, you'll be a pillar, a part of the foundation of Baylor basketball, or what he thought it would be. And I loved hearing that, but he was right. We were a part of something. And when they won it last year, there's been a few moments over the years. I went to watch them play in 2008 or 9 at American Airlines against Gonzaga, walking down Pastor Weibel, the chaplain who's still there, the big bear of a man, put his arm around me. He said, Matt, look out at the floor. Look out at these future NBA players that we had at that point. Like Coach Drew was incredible. 5 years it took him to go from us, the leftovers, to an NCAA bid. 5 years. Yeah. And I'm looking out at these guys, and he's like, Matt, this wouldn't have happened if not for you and what your teammates did. I'm telling you, Jason, there's been thousands of people over the years that have told me things like that. And so you start to see the why, but then you also start to see, yes, I'd love to have not have gone through. I'd love to be a better light in that time, and not made those decisions, run to God instead of from God. But man, it led me to Jana. It led me to the place where I'm coaching now at Grapevine Faith. I mean, I've been here 9 years. Think about it, 11 years ago, I can't coach at Grapevine Faith. I would not be qualified. Right. I'd be lying. And so I see the reasons now. It doesn't make it. It's still hard that it happened, and I hate it for the Dennehy's and everybody that was affected. But man, them winning it, getting to sit on the couch at my house, holding my wife's hand, watching them come across, knowing that I played a really small part in that story. I get emotional now just thinking about it.
Yeah, it was amazing to watch. I actually thought it was going to be the year before in 2020, and then COVID hit. And I thought a really great Baylor team got robbed, along with a lot of other teams, for a chance at that championship. And we talked to Coach Drew back in November 2021, kind of 4, 5, 6 months after they had won it all, and just kind of what he was processing. And I asked him, I'm like, could you have ever imagined the team that you inherited when you came in, and then fast forward 17, 18 years later? And he just kind of shook his head, and he's like, I don't think anybody could have imagined it, but I certainly had hoped someday that we would be here. Now it's a perennial powerhouse, but I feel like he's doing it the right way. Now, I don't know him personally. I know him from afar. I know people who know him well. You obviously, he's written the foreword to your book, The Leftovers, so you know him well. I feel like the team now is probably maybe the team that you had hoped your team would have been many, many years ago, in terms of how they're doing it, right? In terms of joy, Jesus, others, yourself, in terms of the way that he's not only coaching, but the way that he has his players buy into that culture.
Man, well said. I would have loved to have played on, I mean, God, you can go back the last 6 to 8 years, any number of these Baylor teams, because they've really had a lot of success.
Yes.
And I would have loved to be a part of it. It's funny. I talked with him a little bit this last year about culture of joy. They didn't have that phrase, and Jesus, others, yourself, but they've been living that out since the beginning. Mm-hmm. What was so hard for me back then was I was a Bliss guy, and I loved the way he did things, which is about as opposite from Coach Drew as you get. It was military, no nonsense, my way or get out. I'm going to scream at you, break a toilet with my foot, like all kinds of things. And then Coach Drew comes in. I love you. He's smiling. We play music. There's no cussing, all positivity. One thing he does, like over the years, I've heard people say that he just doesn't seem authentic. It seems fake. That's him. Like he is really that positive.
Yeah.
I look at it as it's a relentless positivity. He'll just beat you over the head with it. And he has just been so kind to us former players. 2 or 3 years after graduating, I really didn't think Baylor wanted me back around. I don't think they wanted me to come to games. It was in my head. I just thought I'm a part of this bad time, this black cloud that they just want to get past. And I came to a game, it had been 2 or 3 years, and I was on the floor and I saw him from across the way, and he stopped what he was doing, straight line, not a run, but a fast walk, and just bear hugged me, and I just thought, wow, like I played for you for 1 year and it was hard, but it's as if, and ever since then, he sends texts out to former players. I know I'm not the only one, former players after big wins saying, it's because of you. You're a part of this. Thank you for this foundation. Like, he just goes above and beyond to he invited us to the parade. Like and here's another thing he did is Baylor basketball, to me, there's been no continuity throughout its history, where there's ever been somebody that kind of brings us together. You had the different eras, but and a lot of them aren't good. And there were players from the 70s, 80s, 90s, my time, all the way through, walking together in this parade as one program. And that was pretty darn cool.
Yeah. I mean, that says everything you want to know about Scott Drew and the impact that he's made on that program. And so glad he's including all of you guys, the older guys, and even that leftovers team, Matt Sayman. Hey, congratulations, by the way. I mean, this is a big deal to write a book. I know that it's very hard to do. And you wrote it. You were as authentic and as real as you could be, but also I thought you described it well. This book can be read by younger people too. And that's a good thing. I think the more people that can read it, the better. So they can be not only, I guess, entertained, for lack of a better word, but encouraged as they read your story. So congratulations on the book. It's again, it's called The Leftovers, Baylor, Betrayal, and Beyond. Matt Sayman has been our guest here on the show. Thanks for joining us, my friend. We'll have to see if the Bears can repeat, but they got a good shot. So I wouldn't put it against Scott Drew to be back in that Final Four mix again. Who knows?
We've got the speed. We've got the athleticism. I think what's happening right now is a few weeks ago was they were hurt. They had some injuries to some key players, and so they're dropping a little bit. But this adversity will make them stronger. Coach Drew will use it the right way, and come tournament time, man, we're going to be dangerous. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today.
And many thanks to Matt Sayman for joining us today on Sports Spectrum. There was a lot there, and I'm grateful that he shared what he did share, about as honest and transparent as you can come. I loved when he said that he heard a message from the pastor. This was very early on in the conversation, that told him that we need to stop giving edited testimonies. And I thought, it's pretty powerful. And I hope, I didn't edit any of this, by the way, which is funny, but I hope that you took away something from his transparency and his struggle. And my gosh, going through all of that in 2003, there's a lot more there than he could get into on this podcast. If you want to read about everything that happened, just Google, the 2003 Baylor basketball scandal, and you'll see how deep and how wide that went. And I mean, they were basically given the death penalty in sports in college, where you're really struggling for many, many years. And Scott Drew came in and he took on that challenge. He's been there for almost 20 years now, winning a national championship and helping turn around that program in such a pretty awesome way. So again, many thanks to Matt Sayman for being here. Go pick up his new book, The Leftovers, Baylor, Betrayal, and Beyond, released late February 2022 and is out now for you to get. The Leftovers. Many thanks to Matt Sayman for being here today on the show. Thanks to you as well. Thank you for tuning in. We do love you guys. We do appreciate you guys and are thankful that you tuned in to listen today. Share this with someone if you would feel led to do that. Let them know about Matt Sayman's story. Maybe you can click that follow or that subscribe button as well, so that you don't miss any more episodes of Sports Spectrum. And then check out our website, sportspectrum.com. Thanks for joining us. See you next time right here on the show. Have a great rest of your day.